My name is Evelyn Grace Whitmore, and for most of my life, I was the daughter everyone pointed to as an example. I was taught to lower my eyes with respect, not to raise my voice, to dress modestly, and to silence any thoughts that strayed from what was considered good. My father is the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Edenbrook, one of those small towns where faith goes hand in hand with judgment. From a very young age, I heard that my role was to serve God, the church, my family, and one day, when the time was right, a husband equally chosen by him. But no one ever asked me what I wanted. People saw in me a reflection of my father's piety. But mirrors only show what's on the surface, and inside, I felt more and more like cracked glass. I fulfilled every task with a smile, attended every service, led the youth group, read the verses in a firm voice. But little by little, my soul began to drift away from what my mouth repeated. It wasn't a lack of faith. It was a lack of air. Everything began to change slowly, almost imperceptibly. First, it was a question that arose uninvited while I was reading scripture. What if it wasn't like this? Then it was a longer sigh in the middle of a prayer. And finally, it was the silence. I started to feel nothing, neither peace nor guilt. Just a strange emptiness that grew inside me, like a dark room that no one ever entered anymore. On Sundays, when my father stood in the pulpit with his confident voice and sharp words, I watched him from afar and no longer recognized him. There was a harshness in him that I had never questioned, but that now wounded me. He spoke of mercy like someone reciting a recipe, but there was no mercy in the way he looked at people who had erred. He spoke of forgiveness, but he never forgave my aunt for leaving the church. And when he looked at me, he saw pride, not love. It was on a Wednesday night that something inside me broke. I was supposed to be preparing the reading for the next youth service, but my hands trembled and my chest tightened in a way I could no longer ignore. I left the house without telling anyone. I took the car and drove aimlessly, my hands firm on the steering wheel, my heart racing and my mind blank. I didn't know if I wanted to run away or be found. I just knew I couldn't take it anymore. The road seemed to lead me on its own, as if it knew the way before me. The last thing I clearly remember was a poorly lit curve and the feeling of losing control. After that, only darkness. When I woke up, the first thing I smelled was gasoline and dirt, and pain in my shoulder, my head, my pride. The door was crumpled. My body trembled. I cried out for help, even without believing anyone would hear me. But someone did, and that's when I saw the man standing there, arms crossed, looking at me with a mixture of suspicion and surprise. He was tall, unshaven, his clothes stained with grease, and in his eyes, a quiet sadness. I didn't know who he was, but he knew me. "You're the pastor's daughter, aren't you?" I woke up with the sun filtering softly through the crack in the door, and for a moment I forgot everything. The pressure in my chest was gone. My mind was clearer than it had been in a long time. I sat up slowly, my muscles still sore, but my body less tense. Nathan was already standing, tinkering with something a few feet away from me. When he realized I was awake, he just nodded without saying anything. No demands, no intrusion. I sat, with the blanket still around my shoulders, watching this man who just a few hours ago had been a complete stranger. And I thought there was more dignity in the way he looked at me than in all the rehearsed words I had heard inside the church my whole life. He offered me coffee. I took the mug with both hands, more as an excuse not to talk than out of thirst. Then he asked with a disarming simplicity, "Do you want someone to come get you, or do you need more time?" That's when I realized how much that got to me. He wasn't pushing me back into the world I came from. He wasn't judging me. He didn't want to know why I had run away, what I had done, who I was to others. He just wanted to know about me, how I felt now. I took a deep breath before answering. I think I've already taken up too much of your time. He gave a slight smile. I've got plenty of time. I just respect what everyone needs. A few hours later, Nathan dropped me off 2 blocks from my house, as I had asked. I didn't want anyone to see him. Not out of shame for him, but because I already knew how the town would react, and I wasn't ready to deal with that. He respected it. He gave me a number written by hand on the back of a folded bill. He just said, "If you need anything, I'm around." Going back home was like stepping into a place where time had frozen. My mother hugged me with tears in her eyes, relief in her gestures, and a worry that bordered on panic. My father looked at me, as if he was scolding me, as if my absence had been a failure on his part before the community. But he didn't say anything immediately. Little by little, I was filled with questions, prayers, suggestions for fasting, for forgiveness, for reconnecting with faith. But no one asked how I was, only where I had been, and with whom. When my father finally broke the silence, it was with coldness. "What did you do? Who were you with?" I hesitated. I knew that any answer would open a new door of pain. So I told the truth. A man found me. He helped me. The car went off the road and he got me out. "Who?" he insisted. And when I said the name, I saw in his eyes a spark that turned into a storm. "Nathan McConnell? That ex-convict?" The word ex-convict was spat out with disgust, as if defining someone by their worst moment was natural. Right there, in that instant, I knew the return wouldn't be easy. And the memory of what I felt in that early morning with Nathan wouldn't leave my skin anytime soon. Because deep down, I already knew I had been saved. But not just from the accident, saved from myself. The first few weeks after I returned were made of silence and restraint. I walked through the house as if my feet trod on thin ice. Everything was in its place. The furniture, the framed verses on the wall, the rigid prayer schedules, but nothing felt the same. Neither did I. My body still obeyed, but my soul didn't. I prayed with my lips, but my mind wandered. And the more I pretended that everything had gone back to normal, the more I felt that something inside me was breaking irreversibly. My father never mentioned Nathan's name again. He didn't have to. His gaze did it for him. Every time he watched me from afar, while I served dinner or entered the church with my mother, his eyes carried a silent sentence. "You have shamed me." But what he didn't know, or refused to see, was that for the first time in many years, I didn't feel ashamed of myself. I thought about Nathan often, about his quiet silence, about how he treated me like a person, not like someone's daughter, nor like a symbol of faith, just as someone who deserved respect. Sometimes I would take out the piece of paper with his number and put it away again without dialing. Other times, I almost pressed the call button, but something stopped me. Not out of fear of meeting him, but out of knowing what that gesture would cause in the world around me. I was still trying to keep the ruins of my old life standing. In church, the smiles were the same, but now I saw through them. The women praised my strength for getting over that scare, and the boys looked at me as if my recent fragility made me more interesting. No one said the word sin, but it was in every pause, every forced gesture of care. I was once again the center of attention, only now as a warning. One Sunday morning I heard my father preach about bad company corrupting good morals. He didn't name names, he didn't have to. My stomach churned with every sentence that dripped from his mouth like poison coated in morality. I felt like leaving, like screaming, but I remained seated still, as I had been taught. After all, a pastor's daughter doesn't get up in the middle of the service. After that, I began to withdraw silently. I went out more to walk alone. I stopped more often at the market on the other side of town, where no one recognized me. I needed air that wasn't saturated with expectation. And it was on one of those days, coming back from one of those long walks, that I saw Nathan. He was leaning against a wooden post, his hands in his pockets and his face turned to the ground. For a second, I thought it was my imagination, but it wasn't. It was him. And as soon as he raised his eyes and saw me, I knew there was no real distance between us. There was time, there was fear, but the connection was intact. He didn't smile. Neither did I. We just looked at each other, and in that look, everything was said. Are you okay? I'm trying. Did you think about me? Every day. And when I finally took a step towards him, I knew I wasn't just getting closer to him. I was, little by little, returning to myself. In the days that followed our reunion, I began to feel something that had long been dormant within me. Desire. The desire to go out, to speak, to hear myself aloud without fear of what others would think. And it was with this new courage, still fragile but alive, that I decided to see Nathan again. Not hidden like a fugitive, but as someone who had the right to choose who she wanted to be with. The first time, he hesitated. He didn't say it, but I saw it in his eyes, perhaps out of fear of what my presence meant for him, or for me. Still, he welcomed me. We talked little. The silence between us was comfortable, like a wordless prayer. He told me he worked at a garage on the outskirts of town, that he tried to stay out of trouble. He didn't use the word redemption, but I understood. The way he spoke of the past was always careful, without trying to justify himself, like someone who knows that carrying guilt in silence is more honest than trying to cleanse it with words. Over time, we started to meet more often. Nothing grand. A coffee at a secluded diner, a walk on trails few knew, conversations exchanged in places where no one judged us with their eyes. I spoke about myself with a freedom I had never experienced. He listened without interrupting, without correcting, me without trying to lead me to any conclusion. He just listened, and that for me was love in its purest form. But the town noticed. They always notice. First it was the looks, then the whispers, and then my mother came to me with teary eyes, but a firm voice. Evelyn, please, don't. Destroy the image your father has worked so hard to build. That sentence hurt me more than any reprimand. Because there, with all the gentleness in the world, she was telling me that I was no longer a person. I was an image, a frame that needed to remain clean to support the larger picture of the family. When my father found out about our meetings, there were no shouts. There was ice, a denial so absolute that it passed through me like an invisible wall. He simply said, "This ends now, or you leave this house." I wish I could say I hesitated, that I cried, that I begged, but in that moment I just took a deep breath. For the first time, I breathed like someone accepting to lose everything as long as they didn't lose themselves. I went to see Nathan that night. When I told him what had happened, he was silent. But I saw in his eyes the guilt that wasn't his. He thought he was taking something away from me, and maybe he was. But what he didn't see was that he was giving me back something much greater, the right to be whole. In the following days, I felt the town close in. Some doors slammed shut without warning. Invitations stopped arriving. Even my closest friends began to drift away. But strangely, I didn't feel alone. For the first time, I was with myself, not as someone's daughter, but as a woman. And Nathan was there, not as a savior, but as a mirror. He was also trying to understand who he was outside the shadow of what he once was, and in that reflection, we began to truly love each other, not with haste, nor promises, but with care, with presence, with truce. And even knowing that something bigger was approaching, we chose to stay, at least for now. Things began to crumble slowly like a thread that is pulled without noticing until the whole garment falls apart in front of you. The day before Sunday service, I was called in to speak with a group of church leaders. They said it was just for spiritual guidance. I sat in that room with chairs lined up too neatly and eyes that were too severe. They spoke to me about sin, about testimony, about the impact of my choices on the lives of other young people. They spoke with a calmness that chilled me. No questions, no listening, just statements. They wouldn't let me talk about Nathan, only about how distancing myself from him would be the right step towards what they called restoration. I listened to everything in silence, and at some point, I realized it didn't hurt as much anymore. The greater pain had already passed. What remained was the certainty that I would never fit into that mold again. At the end of that week, my mother handed me a letter. Nathan's name written hastily on the crumpled envelope. He had been fired. No explanations, no chance to appeal. Someone had pressured the owner of the garage, someone from the church. I went to him. I found him leaning against the hood of his car, his gaze downcast and his shoulders slumped. When he saw me, he tried to hide his frustration with a tired smile. "I should have figured," he said. "No matter how hard I try, there's always someone to remind me of what I was." "I don't care about what you were," I replied. "I care about what you are now." But he shook his head. And there, in the silence that formed between us, I understood that what hurt him wasn't just the town's rejection. It was the fear of dragging me down with him. "Maybe it's better if you stay away from me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to see you paying this price." I felt the ground slip out from under my feet. I didn't cry, not in that moment, but something inside me broke with surgical precision. I went back home, not knowing how to react. I didn't want to fight or run away. I just wanted to breathe. I just wanted someone to ask me sincerely how I was. But no one asked. Sunday service was crowded. My father preached about liberation, and I, sitting in the front row, just listened. My heart detached from my body. After the service, I went to my father's study. He was alone with his Bible open as always. I entered and closed the door behind me. I stood there for a few seconds before speaking. "You never asked me what happened that night, to me, in the car, with him." He looked up, surprised. "I know enough," he replied. "No, Dad, you don't know anything, and you don't want to know. Because if you did, you would have seen that that man saved me from something much bigger than an accident." His face tightened, but he said nothing. "I've loved you my whole life," I continued, "and I've spent all these years trying to be the daughter you wanted, but now I need to be who I am." I left without waiting for an answer. I knew he wouldn't give one, and that night I returned to where it all began, to the curve in the road, to the point where my life had broken and begun to rebuild itself. There, alone, I finally cried. Not for Nathan, not for my father, but for myself, for everything I had lost, and for everything that, even so, I was willing to choose. I woke up that Sunday with a clear mind and a broken heart. It's strange how sometimes, when everything falls apart, what's left is a cruel clarity. I knew what I had lost: my father's trust, the community's acceptance, the comfort of a place that, however suffocating, was still home. But there was something no one could take away from me anymore: the truth. The truth about what I felt, about who I was, and especially about who I would no longer be. I spent that entire day inside my room, lying with my eyes open, listening to my mother's footsteps in the hallway, the creaking of my father's chair in his study, and the heavy silence between them. They didn't call me for lunch. They didn't ask me for Bible reading either. I think they knew, even without admitting it, that something had ended between us, something that couldn't be reversed with prayers or promises. That night, I waited for the town to fall asleep. I left with a light backpack and determined steps. I walked to the garage where Nathan used to work, even knowing I wouldn't find him there. But it was an impulse I needed to obey. Being there, where he spent his days, made me feel closer to him. I walked for a while, aimlessly, until, by some grace of fate or courage, I ended up in the same place where we had first seen each other after the accident. And he was there. Nathan was leaning against the same post, head down, cigarette, between his fingers, as if the world had stopped at that exact point since the last time. When he saw me, it took him a moment to react. His gaze swept over my face, as if to make sure I was really there, that I wasn't just another ghost of everything he had lost. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but his voice was weak, as if he didn't even believe his own words. "I shouldn't be in a lot of places lately," I replied, "but this is where I want to be." He dropped the cigarette and stepped on it. His eyes were red. I don't know if it was tiredness or emotion, but when he took a step towards me, my whole body reacted as if it were returning home. Not the home with the always closed windows and the forced prayers, but a home made of flesh and soul, of comfortable silence and difficult truths. "I tried to stay away," he said. "Not for me, for you, because I know what they'll say, what they're already saying. I know how they look at you." "I know too," I replied, "but I also know how you look at me, and that's worth more than any approval." We stood in silence for a while. The kind of silence that doesn't weigh you down, it just surrounds you. Then he asked, "So what now? What are you going to do?" I took a deep breath. It was the question I had been avoiding for weeks. What to do when you have nowhere left to go back to, when everything you were has been torn away, and everything you want still has no shape? "Now, I'm going to live. And if you want, you can live with me." He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, there was something new. There, hope, fear, love, all at the same time. In the months that followed, we faced much more than harsh words. We were ignored by people who used to hug us on Sundays. We lost invitations, friendships, places, but we gained space in each other. He found work in a neighboring town. I started teaching children at a community library. We rented a small house with large windows and light curtains, the opposite of the darkness they had tried to impose on us. And my father? We never spoke again about our last conversation. He continues to preach. I continue to live. Sometimes I receive letters from my mother. Few words, but always with a verse and a sentence that ends with, "I'm praying for you." And as much as part of me misses them, I know that now distance is what protects us. Because to love, I learned, isn't about fitting into someone else's life. It's about respecting the space where the other has chosen to bloom. Nathan never promised me perfection. I never asked for salvation. But in the end, we saved each other in ways that no one but us would understand. And that's what I call a miracle.